Hey, noble ones, welcome to Metatron's Academy. I'm sorry for all the gaming stuff, but I've been filming for my gaming channel and it looks awesome. Plus, I'm too lazy to remove everything. So, you'll just have to deal with that. Anyways, today I found this video called The Dark Side of Wanting to Sound Like a Native Speaker from the channel The English Coach. And I thought, hey, this is really interesting as someone who's been interested and focused on foreign language acquisition for the better part of 3 decades. Goodness gracious, say that out loud. I think this is something that I could share my opinion on and perhaps share for personal experience. So without further ado, where did you put your headphones, Tony? Hit me.
Hey, what's up? Stephanie, the English coach here from EnglishFullTime.com. Recently, I saw a really interesting video about the dark side of being good at foreign languages. I'm going to link it below in case you want to watch it and check it out. But basically, the girl who made this video was talking about how being naturally talented and naturally good at learning languages can sometimes work against you because you end up being lazier than other students. And
Yeah, very anecdotal. I mean, it's a case-by-case scenario, but I suppose there are situations like that, sure.
just depending on your natural talent and not getting as far ahead as you could get if you worked harder. And of course, she talked about a lot of other things as well. I really enjoyed the video, so please go check it out after you watch this one. Anyhow, so this actually got me thinking about the dark side of wanting to sound like a native speaker, because that is what I wanted when I started.
I think it's what a lot of people want. Not all language students are interested in trying to sound like a native speaker, but I've got to say that it is very, very common. So sometimes it can be a good thing, it could be a motivator, and you could indeed progress thanks to it. But there are some situations where you get fixated, and then because it takes a monumental amount of work to even get close to it, to the idea of sounding like a native speaker, and up to what degree also is something we should talk about. But yeah, that could be a problem if it demoralizes you each time you don't. And even more so if there is a little bit of a Dunning-Kruger effect, in the sense that you still don't have enough level, like a high enough level, to recognize that you don't sound like a native speaker, but you think you do, and then people say, no, I can still tell, that could be a little awkward.
That is what I wanted when I started learning Spanish. And I want to explain more about why I wanted that and what happened, what was the good that came out of that, and what was the bad, because there were some things that came out of it that if I knew then what I know now, I would have done things so much differently. I almost wish like I could go back to young Stephanie and be like, look, Steph, you don't have to do it like this, and here's why.
I absolutely relate to that. I think a lot of language learners that then become teachers and then become coaches, like in our case, do experience that sort of feeling whereby they're like, oh, I wish I could go back. But then again, I mean, I enjoyed my process of learning English, Japanese, Mandarin, French, and all the other languages that I tackled. After language number 4, would I go back and learn language number 2 differently? I would say so, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so I want to go into that. Basically, a lot of language learners, English learners, they want to sound like a native. Okay, now the first thing I feel like I have to just break down and say is a native according to who, because we all hear accents differently. For example, you might have an American sounding accent when you speak English, and your peers might think you sound exactly like me or like another American speaker.
Of course, your peers, meaning people that still don't speak English as a first language or perhaps are not from the specific country where your target accent is from, so perhaps.
But then I might hear you and go like, no, I can still hear that your accent is not exactly the same as mine's, right? So
Sure.
different people have different perceptions of accents. And so when you want to sound like a native, you have to ask yourself, on what level? Do I want to be inspired by that accent and use certain pronunciation features?
Which should be done. This is the first one she's saying. I'll comment on it. It's actually good to do that.
When I speak, or do I want to pass as a native? Do I want to fool native speakers into thinking that I am a native speaker? Okay.
Yeah, okay, great. I've got a few things to say about this, but she's presenting excellent points so far, so I do like her very much. All right, so point number 1, do you want to be inspired by a specific accent within the target language that you're trying to acquire, versus do you want to pass as a native speaker? Well, I think the first one is a must, to be honest. Not that you have to try and sound as close to a native speaker as possible, as long as there is a certain level of clarity in your accent, whereby you should try to improve and not pronounce everything within the matrix of your own native language, because that could make it difficult when it comes to achieving communication, which is what you want to achieve whenever you're trying to learn another language, isn't it? So you do want to try and reach clarity, and you do want to try and enunciate properly. You do want to try and sound as close to a native speaker as you possibly can within reason, because that will improve your ability to be easily understood by whoever your interlocutor is. And you should select an accent. Which accent you want is entirely up to you, by the way. Doesn't matter. Yes, some people focus on a more standard accent, if you want to call it like that, a more, perhaps the capital city of whatever country that is your inspiration, but not everyone has to do that. And of course, when it comes to English, you want to sound like an Aussie, you want to sound like a Brit, you want to sound, and even then, where in England, what accent in England, and or you want to sound like an American. And once again, are we talking about general American? Are we talking about a Boston accent, a New York accent, a California accent, a Southern accent? Lots of different types of American accents out there. So you pick the one you want, whatever. Some accents, if they are very region specific and with a small number of people, and they are not the standard, they will be harder to pick up, because you will find less literature, less study aids that help you reach that pronunciation, and not to mention that usually vocabularies and dictionaries give you one, which is the standard of that country. With that being said, though, it's all dependent on your personal situation, because you might be married to someone with that accent, or you might have someone in your family who has that accent, or you might be living in that area, in which case, who cares what dictionaries say, if that's the accent you like the most. But choosing one is important, because otherwise you might start mismatching things, which will not make you sound natural. Although then again, occasionally you can. I mean, for instance, I've always said dynasty. I never really said dynasty. I say privacy. I value my privacy over privacy. I say data instead of data. I say debris instead of debris. But then again, if I feel like saying debris one day, I can still do it, as long as I want to say majority of the way I pronounce things is homogeneous and makes sense within whatever given accent I may have, which is clearly a mix, by the way. I know I don't sound like a native. Well, perhaps, maybe when it comes to sounding like a native and me, on a word-to-word basis, if you ask me to pronounce the word water, I think I can sound like a native. When it's a sentence, it's a bit of a dice roll with me. Might depend. But I think when we go into a full-on conversation like I'm having now, sometimes my intonation is a little different to how someone from England, for instance, which is where I picked up my English, would say it. So if you are from England and you hear me speak long enough, you will most likely be able to say, he sounds good, but I can tell he's not a native speaker, and it's absolutely fine. I mean, I can say that myself. I can self-assess, if you will. I think when it comes to me, you can figure out where I picked up my English, but you can still tell I'm not a native speaker. But anyways, fantastic. She's making excellent points so far.
Okay. That is what I wanted. And I truly think that that is where I went wrong, because for me, it was not about just the pure fun and joy of pronunciation practice, which for some people, that's literally all that it's about. For me, it was more than that. For me, I wanted to have an identity that was not mine, right? I was not a native Spanish speaker, but I really wanted people to think that I was. And I set the bar so high in my mind. In my mind, I thought that anything less than that was some form of failure.
Okay, so she got obsessed. I think at one point I was like that a little bit when I was in my teens, because of course I learned English, not late per se, but sort of too late to actually sound native. I was like in my late teens. So in order to sound actually 100% native, unless you are like some kind of genius, which do exist, you will have to learn the language when you're extremely young. And to be an actual native, some people say you have to learn the language within the third year of age, but that's if you want to be classified as a native. But if you move to a country when you're 9, you will sound native. So sounding native is kind of different to the full-on scholarly definition of what a native is. Two separate things. But yeah, there are people that will sound native and maybe they started learning the language at 15, maybe even later than that. It depends. I mean, if you've got a musical year, that absolutely helps very much. But anyways, yeah, I understand. So she was like focused on it so much, and her she was like being too strict with herself pretty much. So probably she sounded really, really good, but perhaps there were some things that she would say and she couldn't recognize. Like, for instance, it's not easy for someone who's not brought up with, as an Anglophone, to recognize the difference between seat and sit with the sound. It's not an easy sound to pick up. It even took me some time to recognize it. And I had someone point it out to me, and I will always be grateful for that, because I used to say limerick instead of limerick, like the sound, right? Which is natural. So the moment you say Italy rather than Italy, you already sound Italian, right? Italian. You know what I'm talking about. And sometimes the idea of like the shortened, contracted vowels, the reduced vowels such as cupboard, Oxford, rather than Oxford, cupboard, that sort of, yeah, that took a while to figure out, which is why I say in my case, I think the one thing that I would really need to improve still is, rather than single sounds, is probably the overall musicality of the language, which I still haven't got. But anyways, whatever.
Which is insane to me, because the other thing about that is that when you're trying to sound like someone else, it's a game of constantly copying, constantly imitating.
Yeah.
And while copying and imitating is an excellent, absolutely excellent technique for learning pronunciation, connected speech, natural rhythm, intonation, etc., it can go from being a wonderful technique to a game that you essentially never win, because you'll feel like you're never good enough. You never quite get there. Or maybe you fool 5 people into thinking you're a native speaker, but then 2 other people can hear your accent.
Well, that could also be anecdotal once again, because perhaps the 5 times that you did fool some people into thinking that you were a native speaker is because you did actually sound like a native speaker, but it's really difficult to maintain consistency and to do and maintain that for a very long time, which is what I was saying. If I could do it, probably if you give me a sentence, I could do it. But if we speak for a relative, it doesn't even have to be that long for you to figure out that I'm Italian at that point. Yeah, that's probably what it was, you know, because perhaps the natural ups and downs, you make one mistake, boom, they spot you immediately because they're natives. It's like a superpower. But yeah, it's good. I mean, I think it's all a matter of mindset, because for me, I started relatively soon to not consider it as a failure the moment that they would tell me, hey, you're mispronouncing this word, it's not how you say it. I stopped considering it as a failure, but I started considering it as an opportunity to improve myself, because now I know that's how they pronounce it. Lovely. Jubbly.
And now you feel like a failure. And that's exactly what would happen to me. So when people would say like,
right,
hey, you know, I hear a little accent, like, where are you from? I'd be like, I failed, right? They caught me. And it's just so silly, because I think I was focused on the wrong things. I was focused on having the appearance of being something that I wasn't. And then I had to maintain those appearances. And so I was always stressed out and anxious and focused on the wrong things. And you know what I learned? I learned that you end up subconsciously, whether you realize it or not, you end up seeking approval from
subconsciously. Yeah. I mean, it does make sense that it becomes because you always think that it's a thought pattern. As I was saying, it is a matter of the right and wrong mindset. But then the fact that it will transition into your subconscious is actually fascinating. She's making a spectacular point here.
From others, right? You want them to talk about your accent and be like, wow, you have a good accent. When you hear that, you're just like, oh, you're so proud. Like, oh my gosh, they thought I was a native speaker.
Right.
And I get that. Like, the first time it happens, if that's your goal, like, it just feels so good. But I'm at a place now where if people make those kind of comments for me, it literally doesn't affect me at all. I'm not like, oh my gosh, yay, or anything, you know, it's just kind of like nothing. And then in the other languages that I practice and study and stuff like that, if people hear me talking and that, there's no part of me that is seeking that comment from other people. Like, oh my gosh, you sound so...
Yeah, I think that's a level of language maturity at that point. Although then again, I'll be honest with you, if people commend my Mandarin, if people commend my Japanese pronunciation, maybe I get the pitches right. Or if people do commend my English pronunciation, it makes me, or French, it does make me happy. It's still something that makes me happy. That hasn't changed. I think what did change, you don't need to lose that. I think it's just as long as you do lose the getting upset over people saying the opposite, like saying I can still tell there is an accent. Also, because when people say it, it's not that they're actually attacking you; they think you're charming. You sound
So much
charming.
like a native speaker, because I've come to a place in my life where what I put out into the world is a means of self expression. Like, I am here to express who I am. I don't want to be a copy of anybody else. I don't want to spend my energy trying to be like somebody else. I've really come into my own person. And I think that this is also something that you kind of mature into when
Yeah.
you're younger and you're finding your way. We're copying people because we're trying to find what we like.
Yeah.
Okay, so another thing, when I was
Man, this is like a psychological therapeutic session here. I thought it was just about languages, but she's going deeply into the. It's pretty good.
focused on trying to sound like a native, right? I remember I used to box myself in so much. Like, I would not use certain words in Spanish if those words were not part of the regional accent
Absolutely, done that with Japanese.
that I was trying to master. I would not use expressions if they were not part of that. I would not use pronunciation features that exist in Spanish if they were not part of the accent that I was trying to master. Like, I really would just exclude so much
Super
and
focused.
only focus on using the words, the phrases, the pronunciation features, etc. of the accent that I was trying to master. So in a way, it's like I'm constantly imitating, constantly copying, constantly boxing myself in and making it.
I mean, it's not a huge problem, though. To disagree with you on this, that's not a big deal because when you speak English, I haven't heard you use one word with a British accent, and I haven't heard you say trousers or bonnet or boot or open the boot, please. Turn on the blinkers, mate. I didn't hear you say that, and yet I wouldn't say that you are lacking in your ability to express yourself. No, it's not a big deal. You can absolutely focus if you don't want to use expressions that are used in the south of China. If you're trying to pick up a northern Chinese accent, I don't see that. As long as you know those, that's what's important. You need to be able to understand them. Whether you use them or not, it's entirely up to you. There's nothing wrong with that because people do it all the time. It's not like I don't speak, even when I speak my first language, Italian, I try to speak standard because that's how I like it. Sometimes I switch to full-on Sicilian because, once again, depending on who I'm speaking with. With that being said, I don't think I've ever in my life used an expression that they use, say, in Sardinian or Neapolitan for a joke. I do sometimes, but I don't know, Verona, Veronese, I just don't because I don't, but there's nothing wrong with it. My Italian is not lacking in any way.
Like, no, I refuse to use that other type of Spanish because it is not the accent that I want to master. Now, again, the good thing about this is I got really good at copying, but
Yeah.
I constantly didn't feel like myself. I just felt like strange, kind of like this isn't who I am. And now, one of the things that I think it is I was capable of more. I didn't have to box myself in with Spanish because since I learned Spanish and I had teachers who were from Spain and teachers who were from Mexico and teachers who were from Argentina and all these different places, I learned lots of different things about Spanish, words and expressions from here, from there, pronunciation features from here, from there. I could have created my own unique Spanish that would be like a blend of every.
I disagree with that. I think at that point you sound less professional if you mix it too much because, once again, usually Spanish speakers don't do that. Native speakers don't do that. You don't do that when you speak English. And therefore, if you want to do it because it makes you happy, then I say do whatever you want. But if you're trying to teach students, I would still say learn all the features. If you occasionally use a word or an accent from a different, also because you might do it without knowing, it's not a big deal. But if you create this mismatch, as you say now, I would not recommend that. It will sound extremely unnatural. And the reality of fact is, when we try to learn a language, reach a certain level of fluency, sounding natural is a correct focus. That is the ultimate goal. In fact, sounding natural is even more important than sounding 100% native. If you sound natural, you did it. Now, whether or not you have the ability, because not everyone can, but whether or not you've got the ability to sound 100% or 98% like a native, great. It's not necessary, but as long as you sound natural when you speak, that's great. And one thing that natural speech doesn't have is mix match, continuous mix match. Could you imagine that if I like start pronouncing things? Also because, I mean, if you don't have enough exposure to an accent, you might sound like you're parroting it, because it takes years to sound reasonably natural in whatever accent it is in your own. I disagree with that. I think you're being too open-minded now. It's backfiring.
Thing that I had learned, and Spanish speakers would have understood me regardless. They would notice immediately, like, oh yeah, that is not how I say it, but I could have stood in my own way of saying things confidently and just been like, this is who I am. This is what I learned. This is how I speak, and I like it, but I didn't do that. And to be honest, sometimes it was a little bit boring and predictable, the way that I would speak. I just felt like I'm constantly saying the same things over and over again, rather than focusing on being expressive. And so I didn't really play around with the language.
But could you imagine that? Like, it's not that I'm trying to be, because I've agreed with a lot of things she said, but this is the area that sounds a little weird. Because could you imagine if today I tell you, gosh, I'm a little thirsty, I'd like a glass of water. And then 5 minutes after that, I'm asking for some water. And then I move into, which I know didn't sound natural, by the way, because I never say it that way. Or imagine if I switch and I go into water. And then I turn around and I want a sausage. Give me coffee. I mean, come on. It's like, could you imagine that?
Language and make it my own, right? And then the other thing is, because I'm a native English speaker, I bring my whole English linguistic background with me into Spanish.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about speaking multiple languages is you can actually blend languages together. You can take an expression from one language and use it in the other. Even if it doesn't translate 100%, it still makes the way that you speak and sound interesting. I
disagree.
Actually love it when my students take an expression or an idiom or something from their language and say it in English, because it makes me go, I've never heard that before. That's so
yeah, but you need to translate it then and teach them how you actually say it. Otherwise, you're not helping the student. I imagine she does that. But I would, like, for instance, let me give you an example. Each cloud has a silver lining, expression in English, we all understand it. If I translated that in Italian literally, ogni nuvola ha un contorno d'argento. You say that, people would be like, what on earth are you on about? I mean, it sounds nice, even poetic almost, but they would not understand what you actually mean, right? Some expressions can, because we say, non tutto il male vien per nuocere, which means not all evil comes to hurt you. That's how we say it. So it's a completely different expression. And thinking that, oh no, it's nice because you're like, no, because it creates a miscommunicative environment, and it may create an event when the speaker thinks that they conveyed a certain meaning, but they did not, because they didn't know. Never mind if you go into Japanese, because between European languages, time flies, il tempo vola, time flies, kind of like the same. I actually like the time flies when one is having fun. If you say that il tempo vola quando ti diverti, it's kind of weird if you say it in Italian. If you want, I would absolutely understand you. But go into Japanese, go into Mandarin, you will not understand each other. It's going to be a mess. So no, I would not encourage my students to take literal translations, particularly if you jump into Asian languages and languages that are African languages that are really different, Native American languages, because it just becomes then what you're doing at that point, not even just with the expressions, but the way you say things. What you end up doing is that you do a skin, and that is like low level. It's a low level at that point. No, you should know exactly how natives say it. How do natives express this concept that I'm trying to express in my own language? Making a mistake is not a problem, by the way. I would never shame anyone for saying something, but I have to, as a teacher, I have to tell my student, oh, that's adorable. Is that how you say it in your language? That's really nice, but here is how you say it in English. Here is how you say it in Japanese. And then they have to memorize that, and they should use the correct, because otherwise you end up doing literal translation, which is the lowest form of translation, instead of contextual translation, which is how you transfer the meaning, and you do a semantic translation, but you say it in a way that they would say it in that language. That is the effort that we need to put in order to reach a high level in whatever given target language you're trying to focus on or reach fluency in.
So interesting. That's so unique. I actually really love that. I love that idea, you know? And so it's so funny because I really loved and appreciated this when I would hear other people do it, but I wouldn't allow myself to do it. And so now, oh my goodness, I have so much more freedom when I speak. First of all, when it comes to my accent, I still have that Argentinian accent that I learned because I lived in Argentina. And so that accent really got ingrained in my head and I was studying it and I like it. I prefer it. But sometimes, and depending on who I'm speaking with, I might shift my accent a little bit or I might shift my pronunciation a little bit. Sometimes, for example, I don't like doing the S's that they do in Argentinian Spanish because they kind of drop the S or they eliminate it. Sometimes I don't like the way that that sounds. And I'm like, no, you know what? I'm going to pronounce my S's, okay?
Fair
Even
enough.
if other people don't do it or don't like it or don't whatever, I don't care because now
That sounds fine, although it does sound like a little bit of a. I think someone tried to bully her on this, and so she's doing a little bit because I've never had that. For instance, when I speak Spanish, not that I speak it fluently, I'm sure her Spanish is like 10 times better than mine, but I'm saying when I speak Spanish, I do enjoy using retracted S's. So, like, I will say, apart from like Madrid and cut it, but I would say las ventanas, los pimientos. I do the s sound, which is common in some areas of northern Italy. It's commonly used in Greek. I like it, and that's how I speak Spanish. But I've never heard anyone telling me, oh, I don't like that. Well, fine, if you don't like it, whatever. Yeah, as she says, I mean, I am agreeing with her here. Who cares? You speak however you want. And yeah, choose whatever feature you like. And then if you feel like changing that, you can. For instance, I do when I'm speaking. It's also a matter of register at this point, because when I'm speaking English with my friends from London, I will drop my T's. Also, because I find it fun to say like British, water, network. I mean, I wouldn't. I mean, water. Just if I'm joking, to be honest, because usually I had to pronounce the T. But I'm just saying, for fun. But if I'm teaching, I will put the T's back, and if I'm in a professional environment, I will pronounce all my T's, including the ones at the end. I will say forget, forgot, rather than forget, forgot. Did you forget it? Top in it. So yeah, I got to kind of, but that's a matter of register and contextual awareness of where you are, and who you're speaking with, really.
I care about how I feel, right? And I care about self expression. And I no longer care or worry about sounding different. I'm okay being the foreigner. I am a foreigner. You
Right,
know, when I go to Argentina, I'm not from there. I wasn't born and raised there.
right.
Sure, you know, my mom is from Argentina. My dad was born there. He grew up there for a while, but they didn't pass on the language to me. I had to go learn it myself. So I don't sound
Oh, I'm sure though that your parents enjoyed that. Like when you started picking up the accent, I'm sure they liked it because, for instance, I'm from Sicily and I live in the United States, and I imagine my wife and I will have kids here and we'll raise them in the US. I do want to make sure they learn Italian, but it would be fun if my kids actually do pick it up and learn it very well and maybe enjoy doing it. And even if they one day one of my American children or Italian American children comes to me and tells me a sentence or a word in my specific dialect, I understand that whether it's a dialect or a language is a long discussion, and I do think it's more of a regional language rather than a dialect, but whatever, we're not going to go into that. But let's just say that they say something in my variety of Italian, my variety of the way I speak, the way we speak in Sicily. I mean, it would be really fun. I would love it. So I'm sure they enjoyed it.
like I was born there. I could make myself sound that way. I could focus on fooling people, but I don't care about that anymore. I don't even want that to be part.
Yeah, I don't think I like thinking it as fooling. You're not fooling anyone. If anything, you're expressing care and interest for the way they speak, and you like it, I guess. I mean, I don't know if you do, but I imagine if you put so many years into it. I love the way certain accents sound, and that's like I enjoy trying to do that. I'm not trying to fool anyone. So I think we have a difference of opinion. She made a fantastic video. I'm going to stop the react here because I reacted to pretty much half of it. And I think I want to encourage my subscribers to go and click the link in the description in the pinned comment to go and finish it so she can get the view and whatnot. But I have to say that even though we agree on a lot of things, what we disagree on is that I think it's like she was exaggerating at one point because of how obsessed she was. Then she reached certain level of awareness, self-awareness, but now the pendulum is swinging all the way to the other side, and she's re-evaluating things in a way that now, to me, sounds negative, unless I'm misunderstanding it. I don't think you're trying to fool anyone. I think you're just expressing appreciation for a specific linguistic approach and pronunciation variety, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But anyways, thank you so much for watching. And again, the English coach, thank you, 1 million subscribers, so she's doing a fantastic job. Thank you for making this video. It was really interesting to watch. And for all of you, if you have opinions, let me know in the comments, and I'll be more than happy to read them. But for now, thank you so much for joining Metatrans Academy. Bye.